I certainly do not think it's too small, and I've kind of had a yearning personally to become more connected. I think that knowledge share in every sense of the word is beneficial for both ends of the table. And I think mentorship is also beneficial. Having such diverse ideas and diverse backgrounds and bringing them together, can spark a lot. And I think one thing that I've personally been hoping for is more Bahamian mentorship in my life. And if I can be a mentor to anyone, then, that would be even better. So having some sort of forum where that can be done and where ideas can be shared is something that I would push for. And I could see a plethora of different ideas and different outreach, both to the Bahamas and from the Bahamas. So I hope that that is something that can happen within a time frame where we can really start to do something.
Dr. Sears, I tell young people that they're not educated just for the Bahamas, but they're educated to be global citizens. I'm sure you agree with that, don't you?
Yes, I think it is important to think that way. I work in a field where even though in the US and in the Bahamas, we don't, experience the diseases that I work with, typically you see it in other parts of the world, right? But we've seen how quickly that can change for a lot of us, how quickly something can go from one part of the world to the next. And I think, when I think about how the Bahamas can sort of fit into that, it's not too small, right? It can certainly be a part of it. Collaboration is key, right? And you highlight, you bring the best of yourself, your resources to the table and to a group. And I think that's sort of where, there's a comment in the chat, like we need to think bigger and bolder, but also think about how we can maximize what we do have, right? And encourage and invite people to Bahamians to work with us. So making that space to make it easier for people to come in and say, okay, I have these resources, I have this specialty, I want to work with you. How can we make this work, right? And I think just sort of having that openness on both sides is what we need in facilitating that. And I think to Greg's point, like having, and I think Rachel mentioned it as well, having that infrastructure, I think is really key so that people can build on things. So when I say, okay, let's go down and do some sort of survey, right? You want to have the appropriate facilities for people to work in. So what I do is very, very hands-on. I can't work remotely, but thinking in those ways. So, making that space, having the infrastructure in place to maximize what you can get out of people. Because it could be that somebody can't move their research home, but they could probably do some part of it there, right? And have some sort of collaboration. So you're building capacity while also building that relationship. And I think that's sort of where, because we are a small country, right? We need to sort of be realistic about that, but also see how we can fit into those spaces and bring people in to those spaces.
You mentioned that we are a small country, and ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the rate of growth in our country. We always say that growth is one thing, development is another. And we have 400,000 people in the Bahamas. We have many islands that we are supposed to be developing. Some are not developing as quickly as they should, particularly in the southeast Bahamas. There's a whole lot that we can do. Are we utilizing our country in terms of how we develop it? Let's speak to that. How we are moving with the development of our country, because a whole lot of people believe that in the Bahamas we are too Nassau-centric. Can I hear from any one of you on that? I hope Mr. Moss is back.
He is back. So I even know I work in technology. My father, the late Mike Wallace, was an agriculturalist. And he would often tell me how there's a lot more food being grown or should be grown in Andros. Obviously, a lot of stuff to be grown in Andros, Eleuthera, and even in Exuma. And the pandemic, just as Dr. Carey alluded, whenever you talk to your parents, they always complain about the prices of groceries, the prices of everything. But I often wonder, why is it that it's taken the pandemic for us to recognize our level of food insecurity? Mm-hmm. It's astounding to me that we live in the land of sunshine, and yet we seem to have to be very reactive. Dr. Storr mentioned the importance of not being overly critical of an environment where you're not in that environment 110%, and I totally agree with that. But I think there is opportunities to speak to persons who are agricultural specialists, who work in academia, to say, listen, what do we need to do to make certain that if Alabama can grow X, Y, and Z, and Florida can grow X, Y, and Z, surely it can be grown in the Bahamas and we don't have to import it. So our our importation levels need to be declined in order for us to be able to spend money on other things like research. I think that is the one thing that we can do for ourselves, and unfortunately, we're not doing a great job of it. I'm very hopeful that the current administration, with all their global discussions, are more receptive to the perspective of others, so that we can have a better way going forward. But over the past 45, 50 years, the past 20 years, we haven't done a good job when it comes to food insecurity. It's increased. Food security, I should say, food security. Our food insecurity has risen. And I think there's no real reason for it, other than we have placed so much focus on other things and not enough focus on the right things. And as we know, Dr. Sayers, Dr. Carey, you guys can allude to the fact that we need to learn how to eat to go ahead and feed our bodies, so that we don't have to be able to fight off the diseases using medication. You can fight with food. And so
have we become too reliant on the United States of America, Mr. Moss?
Definitely. I think, we've become, unfortunately, a country, we've been entitled to our proximity to the US for so long that we become, in a sense, almost lazy as relates to being able to generate our own sustainability. And I think, the current pandemic, Hurricane Dorian, has shown us that we need to be able to be self-sufficient, and we need to be able to have resources as relates to food production, as relates to alternative building supplies, just the full gamut of things to be able to have a country that doesn't rely on someone else for us to be able to survive. So I think, again, we still want to utilize our position in the globe to access those resources, but we have to be able to get back to a point of, are we farmers? Are we manufacturers? When do we start to export things that are Bahamian built and created to the rest of the country? We have this phenomenal brand that we can market, but we're far beyond just beaches and resorts. So I think we need to, again, in the same breath of trying to make our country more resilient and have a larger economic stability, we need to look at how do we become self-sufficient and then provide products to the rest of the world. So I think, so to answer your question, yes. And also, Ambassador, I wanted to touch back on your previous question as far as, is the Bahamas too small for us to work in? And I hopped off for a second. At first glance, yes. But as you can see from the people on this panel and from us, from the athletic to the academic aspect of this country, we're a global player, and we just have to show the world that is the case. And for me, if I look at the size of the Bahamas to do work in, we typically say no to large counties and cities across the states. But we have people planted all over the world that are patriots that want to do work in the Bahamas. And because of that, we will always have a presence. We just got to be able to utilize those resources outside of our country to be able to be effective.
Before we go to our final question and for your closing remarks, I want you all to speak very quickly on the quality of governance in the Bahamas. We have been flip-flopping for the last 15, 20 years, moving from one political party to the next. And let's talk a little bit about your perspectives as you live here in the United States. You perhaps can look at us with as some people say, with fresh eyes, because you're not really resident in the Bahamas, even though some of you visit from time to time. Let's speak to your perspectives on the quality of governance in our country. Let's begin with who? Dr. Says.
I'll start. I will say, given especially like the more recent increase in violence in the U.S. and sort of in the political space, that I think it makes me even more proud that we as a country continue to have peaceful elections, right, and a peaceful transfer of power. But I think I sort of see a lot of similarities where people make political decisions or hold ideologies without being interested or concerned about facts, right? And I think if you sort of lean into your academics, people who study these problems, right? And, you know, regardless of what side of an ideological question you fall on, if you are genuinely interested in getting to the bottom of that question with information and data and sort of using that to guide you as opposed to the rhetoric that we see, I think it leads to better governance. And I think in general, sort of like having that be your foundation, right, leads to better governance. So I think there's definitely room to grow. I keep like going back to COVID, but I think like when there was a lot of policy discussions about, do we shut down? Do we not shut down? How open should we be? I think, you know, if you looked at the impact, right? How people are being affected, mortality, morbidity, how many people were being sickened and taken out of the workforce, right? I think if you sort of use information to help guide your decisions or as a part of it, right? There you still need a sort of the human and sociological aspect, but I think you get better governance as opposed to just like I said, like an us and them, right? And they hold this position, so we're just going to hold the opposite position because reasons, right? And I think if we can sort of commit to doing that, and also I think being transparent about how you're making a decision, right? Because if you tell your populace, like, look, this is what we're seeing, this is the data that we're getting, and this is why we think this is a good decision to make. You take people on that journey and help them follow your logic. I think you also build a population that expects your decisions to be data driven and information driven, and then they expect better governance because of it, as opposed to sort of just leaning into tribalism.
Let me ask your colleague, Dr. Carey, are we driven by data? Are we driven by science in the Bahamas? Or as one of my friends would say, are we just flying from the seat of our pants?
Well, I think I might bow out of part of that one. It was it's good, a nice lure, but I'll have to defer to what Dr. Stoor said. I mean, I'm not living there, and so I'm not experiencing the day-to-day and under the governance as people who live there. But my people are there. My roots are there. My family is there. My extended family. I think there's only 3 or 4 of us who actually emigrated to the United States. So the bulk of the families between Nassau and Luther, basically. So I have a vested interest in my survival and the survival of my country and the country of my birth. And my adopted country is here. I'm engaged. That's what we do. We were raised, someone that said church before, church and community is what we do. So I give the best opportunities I can in the West Baltimore community with kids who remind me, or children who remind me of where I grew up. Limited resources, we get resources to them, and they do as well as anyone else who has those resources. I have a vested interest in seeing the best of the Bahamas. I do think, as Dr. Sears mentioned that we can focus less on scoring political points and thinking more about unity. I was talking about all of we as one family, that song that resonates from my youth. I also remember the Dr. Off songs and those kinds of the unity songs of back then. There was one Bahamas, coming out of colonialism and into independence. It was one Bahamas. We didn't stratify so acutely. And now it's any decision made by anyone, as long as it's the other person, then people oppose it. But I would like to see more fostering of unity. And if Dr. Sears has a great idea in the academic space, I give her credit for it. I actually cite her for it. Everything that an intellectual, a smart person is doing, be they from the community or from a university, not everything that they're doing has to be wrong or bad. And something that they've done before is, if it's good enough, let's give them credit for it. I don't think anyone is deliberately invested in tearing the country down. And I would like to see more unity, more working together. The kinds of issues that you brought up today, Your Excellency, long COVID, infectious disease, long range economic planning, strategic planning, these need people working together for those to happen. Mitigating climate change and food security. These are things that require unity. It has to be fostered from the top. And from now, even if it's going to be politically unpopular amongst some folks in their ranks. Last thing I'll say too is that we get a lot accomplished here at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, because we collaborate and we leverage resources. We search out through the system. Dr. Sears can tell you, we are hunting always through the system to find out who has what and how can we better use it. And we try not to replicate and duplicate and build another wheel. And I think we can do more of that and about sharing, but we trust each other that we're working for a common good. We're making our university look good. We're making our colleagues look good. This university has been there for 200 years, 220 or some change. More than not wanting to be the person who broke it, I want to be the one who helped to drive it higher to the next level. And that means I have to trust you. We have to share resources. I can't just take all what comes to the table, put it in my pocket and run away. We all have to put the resources on the table, share them, figure out how to make efficiencies and solve these complex problems. And we do that in this environment in an interprofessional and intercultural kind of fashion. The same thing can be fostered, I think, in the Bahamas as well.
Dr. Chandler, Rachel Chandler.
I think having a diversity of thought yields understanding and general understanding, and that doesn't always necessarily mean agreeance and having the same ideas, but being able to understand the person across the room who has a different standpoint and, took a problem from a different angle. Getting a common understanding can often bring more unity and more peace and less polarity and less chaos. So I think that diversity of thought and knowledge share touches on almost every aspect of industry and life and politics and policy and technology. It's overarching.
Dr. Starr. Dr. Starr, are you there?
Yes. So, yes.
Quality of government.
So, in
How are we
regards to
governing
that,
ourselves?
okay. So, I'll speak to personal governance. All right. So, one of the things that I think about is that one of the things that I've done before in the past is that, in fact, right now we're working with the International Atomic Agency Commission, where the program that's being developed is being developed to actually help about 12 different countries on the continent of Africa. And in those meetings, I think about the Bahamas, because when I brought it up, they're like, okay, no, this program is for that. So the thing I thought about was this, is that sometimes there's forced vision. We often have intentional vision, whereby this is something we want to do. Forced vision would be, say, for example, as a result of the hurricane, right? We are forced to have a different vision. And when I work on that committee to bring that about, I think I was forced into vision in terms of, okay, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to be a part of this, I'm going to learn, and I'm going to take all of this information in terms of organizing, planning, and training. And my first thought is, I'm going to use this infrastructure to actually do something at home. right? So that becomes the actual fourth vision. And the last part was that the question was, whether the Bahamas is large enough or so forth. I think, in some regards, in some areas, perhaps, I won't say it's not large enough, but in some areas, it won't be fully maximized based on what's actually needed. And so in that regards, I think, some areas, they may have to decide what would be a priority. So for me, as a low temperature condensed matter physicist, that's not something even I would say, hey, you know what? I need you to buy me a $750,000 piece of equipment so that I can come home, right? Even though that's my area, I would not really advocate for that. Now, someone who is maybe in the area of agricultural research, or maybe deals with fishing and sustainability and so forth, things that okay, I know that a more stronger correlation between what the resources that are invested and the return, those are things I would more or less advocate for. But I think for many of us here who are on the panel, perhaps it becomes fourth vision in a way. We know we want to be more involved with assisting with our country, and in some regards, many of us are really not known. So therefore, there's this thing whereby if you're not known, you're not really called on. So
Okay.
So therefore, yes.
Okay, Mr. Moss, let me come to you with that final question.
So Ambassador, so my mother and thousands of Bahamians pray for good governance every day.
Mm.
So I have the absolute faith that we have the potential to have exceptional governance in the Bahamas. As we all know, that's up to our leaders, and they have to make choices every single day to be able to guide our country. So for me, again, I don't live in the Bahamas every single day, but I know that the prayer of the righteous availeth much. So I'm going to leave it in God's hands. And I have faith that we're going to have exceptional governance leading us into the future.
Mr. Moss, you're from Auckland or Crooked Island?
Say again?
Your parents from Auckland or Crooked Island?
So Meguana and then Med and Exuma.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay, all right, very good. Well, this has been a very enjoyable conversation that we've had here today. And I believe that you all optimistic about the future growth and development of your country, aren't you? Yes?
Definitely.
Of course, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Want to
Don't
hear
leave us
the
out.
voices? I want to hear the voices of more.
Oh, yeah.
The best is yet to come. She's just turning
Yes.
50, right?
Yes, young.
Yeah, heading to 50.
Just heading
And,
to 50, and 50 is an amazing place to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so very, very much for joining us in this conversation today. I certainly appreciate you all being here, and I'm sure our viewers around the world have gleaned a whole lot from this conversation. And I'd like to thank the people here in the embassy in Washington, D.C., particularly Mrs. Sonia Rose, for organizing. What a great panel this has been. And we are doing this again next month with another group of Bahamians. But I'm going to invite you all back at some time in the future to have a conversation with us. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
It has been my pleasure and my honor. Thank you so much, sir, for the time and the invitation.
Good. Thank you so very much.
And
A
please
pleasure,
find a
guys.
way to connect
Thank
us
you.
to each other and to you two as well, and the other Bahamian diaspora as well.
Definitely,
You can
yes.
find me on LinkedIn.
Okay. Thank you. And
Thank you.
good evening, everyone. Thank you.